These give rise to bodhicitta, thinking I will establish all mother sentient beings, limitless in number as the vast expanse of space, at the level of perfect omniscient enlightenment. And to that end I will listen to this profound Dharma and put it into practice. The teaching that we humbly speak of today is a torch lighting the way to freedom, complete instructions on the preliminary practices of the profound and secret heart essence of the Dakini, which is comprised of 3 parts, virtuous beginning, middle and end. From among these 3, we have covered the virtuous beginning. We are now looking at the virtuous middle, namely the main body of the text, which is comprised of 2 main sections. First of all, how to follow a spiritual friend to the root of the path, and secondly, how in so doing to set out on the path itself. So the first of these, how to follow a spiritual friend, we have already covered. We're now looking at the second, how in so doing to set out on the path, namely part 2. Part 2 of the text, the main explanation of the stages for setting out on the path. Which is comprised of 2 further subsections, the general preliminary practice for each session and the specific preliminary practice for the yogas of the 2 phases. So we've covered the first, and we're currently looking at the second. And this second subsection, the specific preliminary practices for the yogas of the 2 phases, is presented by means of 2 further subsections, the common preliminaries and the uncommon special preliminaries. So from among these 2, we're currently looking at the first, the common preliminaries that cultivate the field of one's mind stream with the 4 practices for turning the mind, namely the 4 mind changings of reflecting on the preciousness of the human body, death and impermanence, the defects of cyclic existence, and karmic cause and effect. From among these 4, we're currently looking at the first, reflecting on the difficulty of finding the freedoms and advantages of a precious human body. And this is has been explained by means of 4 sections, identifying the freedoms and advantages, the reason they're so difficult to obtain, the importance of finding them, and reflecting on the need to make full use of them. So from among these, I think we are looking at the 4th, having covered the previous 3. Reflecting on the need to make full use of the freedoms and advantages, which is explained by means of 3 parts, reflecting on the need to be diligent in the Dharma by all means, reflecting on the need to guard the mind, which is the root of the Dharma, and reflecting on the good qualities of the precious human body. We have covered the first of these, reflecting on the need to be diligent in the Dharma by all means, so now we come to the second, reflecting on the need to guard the mind, which is the root of the Dharma. So this is on page 68 of the translation. So there is no part of this Ngondro commentary that is not important, extremely important. But that said, the preliminaries that we're currently looking at are extremely important, especially important. This reflection on the difficulty of obtaining a precious human body, meaning a human birth endowed with the freedoms and advantages. So what do we mean by freedom here? The freedom to practice the Dharma, right? So it goes without saying that if we are born as a hell being, a hungry ghost, an animal, or a long-lived God, there will certainly be no opportunity, no freedom to engage in the Dharma. But on top of that, even if we are born as a human, but we get embroiled, we get all tangled up in mundane concerns like earning money and going to the West and financial security and this and that, well, our lives, our time and energy will be overtaken by those concerns, and we will be unfree. We will not have the freedom to practice the Dharma, to think about the Dharma. So say, we can explain it perhaps in terms of priorities. Say today you've signed up to do a day's work, and your wage for the day's work is 2,000 rupees. But then you offer the opportunity to do another day's work, which is going to earn you much more money. So then you should excuse yourself from this work and go and take the other work, right? It's a better opportunity. So it's like this when we talk about freedom, to say that, oh, I don't have time to practice the Dharma because I'm so busy with my business and so on. Oh, I really want to practice, I have faith in the Dharma. I wish I had time, but I don't because I've got my business to attend to and so on. So we're actually deceiving ourselves if we think like that, right? If we prioritize mundane concerns over practicing the Dharma. In that sense, we compromise our freedom, right? We ourselves are compromising our own freedom to practice the Dharma. It's the same even if you're a practitioner, like a monastic or renunciate. If you prioritize going out to do pujas for other people and to receive offerings for those pujas instead of one's actual main practice, then that's also compromising one's own freedom, right? So in the border regions of the Himalayan border regions on the border with Tibet, we have hundreds of thousands of people living in those areas, right? Sherpa, Dolpa, and so on and so forth. Hundreds of thousands of people up in those areas, but how many of them are actually devoting themselves to the Dhamma? How many of them are actually coming to receive the teachings? Just 4,000 or 5,000, right, at a time. So this shows also that even those people, even these Himalayan, just shows that they are prioritizing worldly things, right, over the Dharma. They're giving more importance to those things than to receiving the teachings. And this then compromises our freedom. So we need to acknowledge that there's nothing more important for us than practicing the Dharma, to prioritize the Dharma over everything else, over all mundane concerns. Then we can embrace our freedom, right? So even for those who seem to be engaging in Dhamma, if, for instance, you're a practitioner but you busy yourself with ritual practice, with pujas, doing pujas at the request of others, or with doing group practice, and you become very skilled maybe in playing the dhammaru and ringing the bell, you have long hair and tied up on the top of your head, and that all looks very grand and fine, but the years go by and you still haven't finished your preliminary practices, your 500,000-fold preliminary practices. You're actually compromising your personal practice for these village rituals and so on, and group practice. This is also shows mistaken priorities, right? So you're compromising your own freedom. So we all need to really think about this carefully, whether you're a lay student or a practitioner. Meaning practitioner, we could say like a full-time practitioner. We all need to carefully consider our priorities, get our priorities straight. That is how we can come to say that we really have freedom, right? So we can make use of our freedom, the freedom that this human rebirth affords us. These days. And if we get caught up in appearances and doing things for appearances' sake, whether we're a lay student or a monastic or whoever, if we get caught up in trying to put on this show of being a practitioner, like these days, it's pretty silly. You hear that people are selling old malas, like malas that have been worn down over years of other people's recitation, and people are buying these malas mantras and then walking around with them at the stupa and so on, chanting mantras, kind of as if to pretend to others that they've done so much mantra recitation that they've worn their mala down, but actually it's someone else's mala, right? So it says, you get caught up in creating a certain appearance, in impressing others, and then you're compromising yourself, right? And the genuine Dhamma, the real Dhamma, gets lost. So when I mention these points, it's not to say that I have these qualities myself. I'm mentioning them because they're important. They're important for all of us. Whether you be a lay student, a monastic, or a lama, these points are important for all of us, to not get caught up in external appearances, to not mistake our priorities, but to set our priorities straight and make genuine use of this precious human rebirth, right? To really embrace the freedom that it offers us. And when receiving the teachings in this way, so receiving the teachings and these instructions which I'm passing on, the instructions and advice that I receive from my own precious teachers like Khenpo Daso Rinpoche, when you and we all of us here hear these teachings, if it touches us, if it affects us, so that we become a bit more aware of our own faults, our own shortcomings, if we become aware of where we've gone wrong, where we need to improve, where we can improve, our mind becomes a bit more tamed, gentle, receptive, then that is a good sign. That shows that all the effort you're putting into coming here, receiving the teachings and listening, is fruitful, is proving fruitful and meaningful. So that's how we should always approach the teachings, right? By applying what we hear to ourselves, and becoming aware of our own faults, our own shortcomings, and how we can improve ourselves. So we're talking about the difficulty of obtaining a precious human body endowed with the freedoms and advantages. So when we say talk about the lack of freedom, we're not talking only about being reborn as a hell being, a hungry ghost, an animal, and so on. But even here, right now, in this present human life, we can still put ourselves or find ourselves in an unfree state. And that will happen if we prioritize mundane activities. If we prioritize the wrong things, then we will be putting ourselves in an unfree state. So we shouldn't just when we talk about that, being free of the unfree states, we shouldn't just kind of quickly tick them off and think, well, I'm not a hell being, I'm not a hungry ghost, so therefore I have freedom. We need to remember, when we talk about freedom here, we're talking about freedom to practice the Dharma. So we need to really assess ourselves. The way I live, the way I think, the way I prioritize things, am I really giving myself the freedom to practice the Dharma or not? Am I really endowed genuinely with freedom to practice the Dharma or not? That's the question. And it all comes down to the mind, right? Mind precedes all actions of body and speech. Mind is the king of the body, right? Even if you're taking a single step, walking somewhere, if you don't have the intention, the mental intention to walk, to lift your foot up and go, you're not going to go anywhere, right? Your body is not going to move. Likewise with speaking. It's a mental intention that precedes every physical action, every verbal action. And this is why from among body, speech and mind, mind is said to be primary. So this being the case, if we don't first of all set our mindset, then our body has no chance, right? Our body will do what our mind tells it to do. Body has no independence in and of itself. So the body, when we talk about human rebirth or the precious human body, we're talking about a physical support. to make this physical support a positive physical support, then we need to work on our mind, right? We need to align, we need to set our mind in the right mindset, which means not falling prey to the afflictions of attachment, aversion, ignorance, and so on, and to direct our mind towards the Dhamma, towards practicing the Dhamma in order to tame our own minds. Then our body, our physical actions, our verbal actions will follow suit, right? So the whole of the Dhamma depends on the mind, and the mind is dependent on the precious human body. This is an independent relationship of support and what is supported, right? The mind is the root of Dhamma, and the freedoms and advantages are the support or accessory necessary for this. So there is nothing that is not contained in or included in the mind. The mind is the root of the Dhamma. Or as it says here, the whole of the Dhamma depends on the mind. So back to the bottom of page 68, and the mind is dependent on the precious human body. This is the case whether whether we're talking in the context of the sutra teachings or the tantra teachings. Sutra teachings, tantra teachings, madhyamaka, what have you, mind is primary. Rinpoche is quoting several lines of scripture from the Madhyamaka text and Longchenpa's wish-fulfilling treasury and so on, which all back up this point, speak to the same point, that the whole of the Dhamma depends on the mind. Mind is primary. And it says here the mind is dependent on the precious human body, but we could say it's dependent in the sense that the body is the support for the mind, right? Mind is dependent on the precious human body might sound a bit misleading, so we could also understand it as saying the mind is the support. The precious human body is the support of the mind. So for the meantime, in this present circumstance, where is the mind sort of based? What is the support, the physical support or location? Yeah, physical support of the mind. At the present time, it is this precious human body. So that's what's meant by the mind is dependent on the precious human body. But mind itself is primary, right? The body is only actually made alive by the presence of mind, the presence of consciousness, right? As soon as consciousness leaves the body becomes a corpse, becomes this inanimate material, completely useless. So it's only mind that allows the body to function. So this is what's meant by this line. The whole of the Dhamma depends on the mind, and the mind is dependent on or supported by the precious human body at this present moment. This is an independent relationship of support and what is supported. So support is this physical body endowed with subtle channels, winds and essences, and as we mentioned before, this gives us a special opportunity for practicing the Vajrayana teachings, the subtle yogic practices, and for receiving empowerment, tantric empowerment as well. So in that sense, the physical body is very precious. But if the body on its own, without mind, is nothing. It's just matter. Because mind is primary, right? The body is dictated by the mind. The actions that we perform with our body, our actions, our expressions, our gestures, everything, our comportment, all dictated by the mind. our state of mind, whether our degree of attachment, aggression, ignorance, or, for instance, we might be in a very positive state of mind, humble and respectful and decent, as you see in the case of some people. Think of Mahatma Gandhi, of Nelson Mandela. Because of their minds, their positive states of mind, then they did wonderful things with their bodies, performed wonderful physical actions. On the other extreme, then we have people who, because of motivated by the afflictions, intense afflictions of anger and so on, they create appalling weapons, destructive weapons, maybe even illnesses like COVID. A lot of people say COVID-19 was man-made, right? So anyway, we have both extremes. But this all just goes to show that physical actions are dictated or stem from states of mind. So mind is primary. Mind is supported by the body, but nevertheless, mind is primary and the boss of the body. So the mind is the root of Dharma, and the freedoms and advantages are the support or necessary for this. For this reason, one needs to train only in taming the mind. For instance, they depend upon one another. It's a bit like if you have two poles and you rest them against one another, as Rinpoche is showing. Then they balance and support one another, right? But if one goes kind of out of alignment, then both will fall down, right? This is what's meant by support and supported. This phrase, support and supported. Two things in a mutually dependent or interdependent relationship. The vital point is to tame your mind, for mind's the root of Dharma, so the Buddha said. As Buddha said, it is excellent to tame the mind. Whatever level of Dharma we're training in, cultivating bodhicitta, deity practice, generation and completion phase, the great perfection, what have you. All of those practices are rooted in the mind. All of those practices are based on the mind. They are practices of mind. So when it says above, the freedoms and advantages of the physical body, the human body, are the support or accessory for this. She was speaking to the other connotations that this word in Tibetan has. Support can also mean friend, like a husband might call their wife their friend, using this same Tibetan word. That's how it should be. As spouses, husbands and wives, partners should be friends and supports throughout life, right? Supporting each other no matter what they go through, ups and downs. But these days it's often not the case, and couples end up fighting, separating, and so on. It shouldn't be like that, right? There's a story about a king that is found in the sutras, which would be very pertinent to tell at this point in the text. But it's a very long story, and it would take a lot of time, more time than we have. And it's important, actually, when giving teachings, it's important to teach appropriately, meaning according to give teachings of an appropriate length, depending on the context. That's actually an important aspect of teaching, just as, for instance, if you're a chant master, it's important that you lead the puja accordingly, meaning of an accordant length, using the extensive liturgies when it's appropriate, the more condensed liturgies when it's appropriate, so that you can finish the practice on time, given the circumstances. Like one of in the previous generations, chant master Zumzi Gyaso was so skilled in this. Whatever the circumstance, whatever the setting, he would lead the puja just effortlessly and seamlessly, of the perfect length, finishing at exactly the right time. So I struggle with this. Sometimes I run over the allocated time. Sometimes I spend a lot of time on one point and then I run very quickly through other points. So that's not a good thing, actually, when it comes to teaching. As Nagarjuna advises, and this quotation is from his letter to a friend, which is translated in English, the vital point is to tame your mind, for mind's the root of Dharma, so the Buddha said. Letter to a friend was a teaching that Nagarjuna wrote to a king at the time. This king was actually Nagarjuna's friend. And he wrote this letter of advice to the king. So the vital point, he says to the king, is to tame your mind, for mind is the root of Dharma, so the Buddha said. If you don't tame your mind and you fall under the sway of the afflictions of attachment, anger, and so on, then you will end up doing a lot of negative, harmful actions, and this will cause you strife, and it will cause you yourself strife, and it will also cause others strife. And Nagarjuna says, so the Buddha said. So he's attributing this advice to the Buddha, right? Because the king was Nagarjuna's friend, so he wasn't kind of speaking to him as a student, but speaking to him as a friend. So when one has faith in the Buddha, it's usually enough to quote something the Buddha said, and people accept it. People accept the veracity of a statement. If it's, if you say, "Oh, Buddha said this," and people accept that it's true, that it's valid. But in the West, in modern places, that doesn't work, does it? Often doesn't work. You can say, "Oh, you can attribute a teaching to the Buddha," but people still don't believe it. They don't. They don't. Give the same authority. They don't have the same trust in Buddha and the veracity of his word. But so we could say Westerners or modern people from more modern countries need to approach the teachings by means of examining and investigating, scrutinize the teachings, and coming to find out for themselves that the teachings are valid, and then they feel trust and faith in them. So that's one approach, and that's fine. But there's in Rongsam Mahabandita's Entering the Way of the Great Vehicle, he mentions the king of all gods, who has excellent clairvoyance and higher perceptions, such that when he looks out at other beings and other things, through the power of his clairvoyance, or we'd say higher perception, and he looks back into time, he can see, okay, after this generation there was that generation, thousands of years before that there was this person and that person, this god and that god. He can see the whole course of history, people passing away, buildings disintegrating, entire worlds disintegrating. But his clairvoyance is limited, so he sees very far back in history, thousands and thousands of years. But there comes to a point in time where he can no longer see beyond that, and so he comes to a faulty conclusion. He thinks, he comes to the comes to the conclusion that the entire world is created by Brahma, by this Almighty God, and is also destroyed by this Almighty God. So He comes to the conclusion because of what he sees with his clairvoyance, but his clairvoyance is limited, so he can only see so far. So our perception is similar, right? The perception of ordinary sentient beings. We can examine things, we can investigate things, make use of our intelligence, and we can come to understand things to some extent. But our intellect, our intelligence is limited. So we can only go so far we can only go so far with our own examination. And she's giving another illustration to use this. Another example to illustrate this, sorry. The point is that indeed we can use the power of our intelligence to examine things and come to conclusions, but our intelligence is limited. So it can only take us so far when it comes to examining things and examining the nature of things. Yeah, our intelligence is limited. We can only get so far. We can only understand so much. Just as Buddha said in the King of Samadhi Sutra, if the perceptions of sentient beings was valid, if what they saw with their eyes, heard with their ears, and so on, what they understood with their conceptual minds, was correct and valid, if that was the end of the story, what use would there be for the visions or the insight of noble beings, of sublime beings, right? If ordinary beings could understand everything through their limited perceptions of eyes, like scientists, what they see through microscopes, what we can understand with our intellectual mind, then there would be no need to resort to the wisdom and the insight of noble beings, of enlightened beings. But the intelligence and perception of ordinary beings is limited, right? For instance, with our eyes, we can only see so much with our eyes. We can only touch and experience so much with our hands, and so on. So there are further lines of scripture I think Rinpoche quoted to illustrate this point, to back up this point. And Rinpoche is saying I mentioned this point, I'm speaking mainly to the scholars here, the scholars or those who have more kind of skeptical, analytical minds. And indeed, Buddha did say, he said, bhikshus and scholars, you should not just take you should examine my words like a goldsmith examines gold. Don't just take them on faith. Buddha indeed said that, and for a good reason. It's important to analyze and examine for ourselves. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that there is a limit to our intelligence. We can only get so far with our own, with our intelligence, our own conceptual intellect and intelligence. The same point is spoken to in the Semakundu, one of the Pramana valid cognition texts. So it says there that we have the two types of valid cognition, of perception, direct perception, and inferential perception. But actually, these two types of perception are too limited. We cannot come to realize or understand the inexpressible, inconceivable ultimate truth, the ultimate reality, through the direct and inferential perception of ordinary mind, conceptual mind. The same thing is spoken to in the way of Bodhisattva and other texts. And then debated in the way of Bodhisattva, Shantideva says, to paraphrase, that the ultimate truth is beyond the domain of conceptual mind. And this specific verse of Shantideva's teaching is then debated and clarified in an exchange between Mipa Rinpoche and Parirapsa, previous scholar. So anyway, this is a tangent, a bit of a tangent, but it's an important point, because we need to acknowledge the limit of our intelligence. If we become too invested in our own intelligence, our own perception, then that can be very problematic. And as I said, this point is addressed in Rongso Mahapantita's Entering the Way of the Greater Vehicle. If one is a scholar and interested in the philosophical text and so on, I think it's really important to study that text by Rongso Mahapantita. So we can end up in a dangerous place if we become too attached, too fixated on our own limited intelligence, simply speaking. So the vital point is to tame your mind, but mind is not a physical thing. It's not something that can be tamed or subjugated or broken down like a physical object, like the way that you would grind spices in a pestle with pestle and mortar and break them down. So how do we tame mind then? Well, we tame mind by practicing, right? By applying ourselves to practice, to the spiritual path. We need to keep this in mind, the fact that all Dhamma practice, or study, practice, retreat, whatever we do, the whole point of it, the only point of it is to tame our minds, to tame and transform our minds. If we fail to do that, then it really doesn't matter how much study we've done, how many years of retreat we've done. We need to tame our minds. The vital point is to tame your mind. For instance, when we take medicine, the point of medicine is to heal our illness, right? To make us better. If the medicine we're taking itself is poison, it's certainly not going to help us heal, it's going to kill us. So the Dharma that we practice also needs to be genuine Dharma, correct Dharma. Otherwise, if we practice some mistaken Dharma, then that is actually going to make us even more sick than we are. So you see this happening a lot these days. Just like someone taking the wrong medicine and getting more sick, people practicing the wrong Dharma in the sense of their mistaken idea of the Dharma. And they end up just becoming more afflicted through their supposed practice. So whatever you're doing, even if you're just doing a single kora down at the stupa, you need to keep in mind, I'm doing this to tame my mind. Like last year someone said to me, their son had said to them, we know, Dad, why are you doing all this kora, walking around the stupa? If it's not a good form of exercise. If you want to do exercise, better go to the gym. Why are you doing prostrations? Better to do some other form of exercise. Why are you offering these badalams? What's the point of that? And then this father said, my son is asking me these questions, saying these things to me, and what answer can I give them? Or this son also said, you say this is meditation, your kora, you're offering butter lamps, but meditation is sitting still and being silent like this and that. So then I said, you should explain to your son as follows: all of these practices of prostration and kora and offering and so on, they are all types of meditation. They're all ways to train your mind, to train and tame your mind. When you do those things, you're recollecting the Buddha, Shakyamuni, the enlightened ones and their teachings, and with respect and devotion, you're focusing on them and cultivating respect and devotion and so on. And in that way, all of those actions, prostrations, kora, offerings, mantra recitation, all become forms of meditation. They are all genuine types of meditation. For instance, when you chant the Mani mantra with your mala made of 100 beads, you should think that your mala is actually representing or is the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities. So you should be recollecting the deity in the mandala, and every time you reach the head bead of your mala, you should recollect the Idam deity. So if you're chanting the Mani mantra, you recollect Avalokiteshvara. If you're chanting the Vajrakilaya mantra, when you reach the head bead of your mala, recollect the Idam deity. So in that way, all of these practices of recitation and so on become forms of meditation practice. And this instructions about the mala and recollecting the deity when you reach the head bead is taught by Jujun Rinpoche in one of his instructions. This is how we should be practicing, right? When you do kora, when you go down to the kora and chant mantras, holding your mala and so on, one should not be thinking or be all busy and chattering and tossing your mala everywhere mindlessly. You shouldn't be thinking, oh, so-and-so did 3 koras, so I'm going to do 4. The vital point is tame your mind, for mind is the root of Dharma, so the Buddha said. So there's a beautiful story, like I said, about the king Sakya, who went out riding on an elephant, and then his elephant went wild. And anyway, there's a very nice anecdote about how the root of all things is the mind, but I won't tell that story, it'd take too long. So, to sum up, the point of what I just said was that when you go about your various practices like kora, prostrations, reciting mantras, while doing kora and so on, offering butter lamps and so on, you should understand that all of those things are forms of meditation practices. You should do them, and you should do them in that way, with faith and devotion in the Buddha and Guru Rinpoche, recollecting them, and thinking that your practice is an offering and so on, and ensure that those activities become genuine types of genuine practice. So otherwise, even if you busy yourself doing all sorts of so-called Dharma activities, prostrations, offerings, this and that, if your mind isn't in the right place, then those seeming Dharma activities are not going to become genuine Dharma activities, they're not going to become genuine practices, and they will not lead to, which is to say, they won't help you tame your mind. The Dharma depends on the mind, and that depends on the freedoms and advantages interdependently. So, attaining a human rebirth, encountering a teacher, encountering the Buddha's teachings, gaining this opportunity to practice. Now that the many causes and conditions, namely the causes and conditions just mentioned, have come together, tame your mind. That is the main point of Dharma. Tame your mind means tame, reduce, transform the afflictions of attachment, aversion, and ignorance that plague your mind. Tame your mind, crush those emotions, transform those emotions, just like you would crush and grind spices in a pestle and mortar. You see, sometimes you see in very excellent, genuine practitioners who are so tamed, who have really been transformed by their practice. There are people, many people like that around, who were just totally free of attachment, aversion, jealousy, and so on. You never hear a single word, a single negative word come from their mouths. They're so gentle, so transformed. All they think and talk about is their teachers and recollecting their teachers and the Dharma. And they always have a positive take on everything. Positive speech, positive take. That's a sign of having taken the Dhamma to heart. It's a sign of having tamed their mind. Otherwise, if you, on the other hand, you might have chanted hundreds and thousands of mantras, but if your mind is still just bubbling away like a cauldron of mental poisons, then what use is there? What benefit is there? We can't say there's no benefit to reciting these mantras. They are, after all, the names and blessed mantras of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So without a doubt there is some benefit, some blessing in reciting them regardless of the state of one's mind. But that's not the point of practice, right? Practice is meant to tame our minds and transform us. The sufferings of fear and poverty that occur throughout this life and will occur in subsequent lives, so including at the time of death and in the Bardo, the intermediate state. We don't have time to talk about the terrifying appearances that can arise in the abyss of the Bardo, the intermediate state. But there is a lot to say about that. All of these are the negative consequences of using your precious human body to indulge in pointless distractions. So the sufferings of this life as well: hunger, poverty, destitution, conflict, like the conflict we see in Israel and Gaza, and the poverty that is created. You see these things on the news, right? Incredible poverty and suffering. This physical suffering of hunger and poverty. You see some soup kitchens for refugees and so on, where whole families are having to share one single bowl of soup and that kind of thing. All of these negative consequences are the result of using your precious human body to indulge in pointless distractions. As Pacha Rinpoche said, better than a mountain of effort is to accumulate a single spark of merit, something like that. So better than a mountain of effort, meaning effort in mundane pursuits, is a single spark, a single drop of merit. Because all positive things come from merit, from virtue, and all negative consequences, all discomfort and suffering comes from engaging in meaningless pursuits. So why do some people always get sick and they don't recover even when they get treatment? Why are some people afflicted by poverty, by hardship, by bad luck, by misfortune? Some people, for instance, do the same kind of business. You might have two people, they engage in the same kind of business, but one does really well and the other loses everything they invested. Why is that? Well, it's mainly because of the karma they accumulated in past lives. Right? Positive karma or negative karma. On the other hand, all the happiness and good qualities of higher rebirth and ultimate existence come solely from not wasting the freedoms and advantages, from not letting the freedoms and advantages of the precious human birth go to waste, and applying oneself to the path of Dhamma, to accumulating merit, to cultivating virtue. This is the source of all happiness, even all mundane happiness, such as good health, having enough to eat, having comfortable circumstances. It might be that in this life there are people doing genuine practice but still suffering in these material ways as a result of past karma, but that doesn't mean that what they're doing now, their current practice, is not going to be the cause and source for happiness in the future. Definitely that will come to fruit. So as we read in one of the Buddha's sutras, child of noble family, it has never occurred to those who wander in cyclic existence that their body ornamented with the freedoms and advantages is so difficult to find. Because of their evil friends, they continue to circle in cyclic existence and are tormented by the fire of suffering. But I, by reflecting on this supreme freedom, have been completely liberated from existence. You too should do likewise. Because of their evil friends, because of a perverted spiritual friend, so because of negative company, bad influences. This is one of the can be a really destructive influence when you make bad friends, get into bad company. That can have a really negative influence on one. Like a young person falls into bad company and then led onto a bad path. They start drinking, taking drugs, start getting into fights. Their whole life goes to waste. They drop out of school. We see this happen, right? The company that we keep has such a strong influence on us. So if we fall under the sway or influence of bad friends, evil friends, this can have a terrible influence. As it says, they continue to circle in cyclic existence and be tormented by the fire of suffering. So that being the case, by reflecting on this supreme freedom of the precious human body, you should free yourself from existence, from samsara. Buddha says, this is how I freed myself. You too should follow suit. You should do likewise. If you are my followers, then you should do like me. You should reflect on the value of these freedoms and advantages and make use of them, and thereby free yourself from samsara. Now we come to the next subsection, reflecting on the good qualities of the precious human body. By listening, reflecting, and following the practice, these constituting the excellent door of the sublime Dharma, one tames one's mind stream, encourages others to do positive actions, and dons the great armor of liberation. So by listening, reflecting, and following the practice, listening means to receive teachings, study the teachings. If you don't study the teachings, then there's not much you can do. When we say listening, or the same term could be translated as study, refers to receiving teachings, studying the teachings, reading the teachings. It doesn't just refer to like philosophical study of the major treatises, the 5 major formal genres of Buddha's teachings and so on. It means to receiving instruction and explanation on whatever practice you're doing. For instance, if you're practicing the money mantra, accumulating the money mantra, or if you're doing prostrations, you might not be engaging in any kind of philosophical study, but you're doing, say, accumulating the money mantra. Well, you need to understand what the money mantra is, how it should be practiced, and so on and so forth, right? So you need to listen to teachings on the money mantra, on whatever practice you're doing, and come to understand the practice that you're doing, right? And we listen to teachings from our teachers, from our spiritual friends. These teachings should be rooted in the words of the Buddha and in the commentaries of the great masters of the past. As Pacharamshi said, the teacher's instructions must be rooted in Buddha's word and in the major commentaries. Those are the authority. So if the teachings you receive from a teacher are in discord with Buddha's words and with the major commentaries, then those points should be discarded. The authority is always Buddha's words and the treatises. I missed the beginning of this point, but Rinpoche is addressing the Himalayan people from Dolpo and Limi and Humla and so on, saying basically that for me what is important is that you pay attention to the teachings, that you listen to the teachings and apply them. Here there are perhaps more than 3,000 of you have come here to listen to these teachings. That is meaningful, that is good. If another few thousand, say another 9,000 of you came down from those areas to receive these teachings, that would be even better. I mean, of course it would be better, and that would please me more than, I think Rinpoche was saying, that would please me more than showing me kind of respect with like displays of pomp and circumstance and so on. That's not important, that's not helpful. But if you guys can listen to the teachings and not just listen to them, but take them to heart and actually put them into practice in your lives, so that your lives on a daily basis actually start to transform and change. Like in the last year or so, I went to some areas near Humla, near my monastery, in Limi, and I think it was Limi and Kamarong. And after my teaching there, then people started to actually change their lifestyles. They stopped hunting, families became more harmonious, people stopped drinking or started at least reduced the alcohol they were drinking, stopped drinking or stopped smoking or smoking less, and really kind of changed their lives in these concrete ways. So that is a genuine benefit, right? Genuine benefit and result to me going there and sharing the teachings with you and you listening to them. So that is what pleases me. That is what pleases me in you listening to the teachings that I'm sharing with you, the teachings I've received from my own great teachers, and putting them into practice and changing yourselves. That is what pleases me. Otherwise, just creating these big welcoming parties for me when I arrive in Kathmandu, and welcoming me with hundreds of motorcycles and cars and a lot of pomp and circumstance. That is not pleasing. So as my own teacher said, the best offering to one's teacher and to the teachings is practice, meaning applying the teachings in one's own life and changing oneself, right? Improving oneself. That's the genuine offering, not material offerings. So these days I'm older, and people up in Humla and so on have a lot of faith, and when I leave the monastery or arrive at the monastery, when I travel, they accompany me with great parties of horses and so on. But there isn't that much benefit to that, right? The real benefit for all of us is if you can listen to the teachings and apply them, right? There's benefit for you, benefit for me, both. This is what my teachers had always emphasized these points. I think Rinpoche was saying that when offerings are made to him, like when the students make mandala offerings and so on to him, then he receives them as offerings and offers them up to his own root gurus. Then there's merit for those making the offerings, the mandala offerings and so on, also merit for Rinpoche by receiving them without pride and offering them up to his own teachers. I think that's what Rinpoche was saying just then. So now we come to the next subsection, reflecting on the good qualities of the precious human body. So This begins with by listening, reflecting, and following the practice, these constituting the excellent door of the sublime Dharma. So we were just talking about this word listening. This means to listen to teachings on whatever practice you're doing. So if you're practicing mantra recitation, if you're doing prostrations, if you're visualizing a deity, you need to be doing so with knowledge, in an informed way, right? So how to practice, how to recite that mantra, what does it mean, why are you doing it, how to visualize the deity, and so on and so forth. So up in the monastery, every year we perform an accumulation of many millions of Vajraguru mantras at the monastery, with a great gathering of lay practitioners in the entire monastic sangha, with a mandala, erecting the mandala and so on. And I really encourage people to attend, because I say, explain that it is not the same as reciting the Vajraguru mantra just at home on your own. Coming here, doing it in a group where we've erected the mandala and reciting the mantra for a fortnight or so with the monastic sangha and so on, it has a special blessing, special benefit. So I encourage others to go and... Okay, so just in line below we have, by doing that one tames one's mind stream, encourages others to do positive actions. So an example of encouraging others to do positive actions is how I often encourage students up in Humla and the nearby areas to attend our annual Vajraguru accumulation because of the benefits of that. So there is great merit in encouraging others to do positive actions, merit from one's own side, and also merit, if others follow your advice, then merit for them. And one dons the great armor of liberation. To do so is what we call the great victory banner of the sage. The victory banner of the sage does not refer simply to one's style of dress, but rather to one's diligence. So again, encouraging others to do positive actions. Well, one can and should encourage other in positive actions, in virtue and the Dharma, but each of us need to practice the Dharma willingly from our own side, right? You cannot force someone to practice the Dharma. It cannot be, Dharma cannot be forced. It needs to be done willingly from each of our own side. So irrespective of whether one assumes the appearance of a layperson or takes monastic ordination, to practice in this way is to don the great victory banner of the sage. Now at the top of page 70. Such diligence is what determines a precious human body. So it is such diligence in the Dharma that makes our body a precious human body. On the other hand, if you lack this diligence, even if you are monastic, even if you're wearing the Dharma robes, even if you have the title of Tuhu or some other Dharma title, if you don't apply yourself with diligence in this way, you cannot say you have a precious human body. There's nothing valuable there. So again, a precious human body, this is what qualifies a precious human body as precious. Just having a lot of wealth, living very comfortably, having some high status, like living over in America in fancy circumstances, there's nothing valuable, especially valuable about that. That does not make one's human body, one's human rebirth more precious or valuable. It's applying oneself with diligence to the Dharma that makes one's human rebirth precious. So the benefits of thus training your mind are infinite, but they may be summarized as follows. You will cease to engage in the activities of this life, realizing that they are all pointless. So if you really take this to heart, you will abandon the mundane activities of this life. You won't be like a lot of the lamas these days who are running around here and there trying to earn money, engaging in business, get offerings, going overseas for the sake of offerings, and doing all of that. You will not engage in such activities if you take the freedoms and advantages to heart. Since your thoughts will be on future lives, not on this life, whatever you do, you will act without contravening the law of actions and their results. You will always act in accord with karma, because you'll have your sight set on future lives. In this way, your body, or your human body, will become your human body will become beautiful or handsome. I'm not quite sure where this is in English, but how this has been translated in English. But what this means is that, in terms of its meaning, the body will become beautiful. The human body itself is actually impure. It is full of impure substances like mucus and snot and urine and feces. There's nothing clean or beautiful essentially about the physical human body. But if we make use of it, if we take to heart its value, the value of these freedoms and advantages, and we use it to apply ourselves to the Dharma, then this body can become a beautiful thing in that sense, because it is being used in such a meaningful, excellent way. So these days a true precious human body, a genuine precious human body or human rebirth is difficult to find, even amongst practitioners. Someone who's really using one's this human rebirth, heart and soul, for the Dharma, that is rare. So she's talking about the importance of staying in one place, just staying put in one place and focusing on the Dharma instead of getting caught up in all the busyness of different activities. These days, lamas, practitioners, ngakpas, they're so busy. There was an anecdote, I think, a conversation with Khenpo Daze Rinpoche where someone had broken their leg, or almost broke their leg, and Khenpo Rinpoche said, "Oh, how wonderful." And I thought, what is wonderful about them breaking their leg? Well, if you've broken your leg, you can't move around. If you can't move around, all you can do is apply yourself to the Dharma. So that's excellent, isn't it? An excellent circumstance to break your leg. One time Khenpo Rinpoche was teaching the words of my perfect teacher, and a lama who was receiving those teachings requested Khenpo Rinpoche for Dzogchen teachings. This Lama said, "Oh, Khenpo Rinpoche, please give me some Dzogchen teachings." Maybe this Lama didn't have time to stay for the whole, said they didn't have time to stay for the whole teachings on the words of my perfect teacher. Khenpo Rinpoche said, "Well, if you can't stay put even for the words of my perfect teacher, after all, there's nothing more precious than that. If you can't even stay put for the words of my perfect teacher, there's no way you'll get along with the Great Perfection teachings," something like that. So it seems that being able to stay put, to stay still, to refrain from getting drawn into lots of activity, that seems to be a very important thing for a practitioner. With diligence blazing like fire, you'll persevere in listening, reflecting, and meditating by abandoning unsuitable companions given to negative actions, and always performing positive actions, you'll follow virtue. Unsuitable companions, as we said earlier, bad companions have a really strong influence on us. We're influenced by the people who are around us, right? So if you hang around with someone who is always focused on just getting offerings and money, then you'll become like that. You'll be stained by their faults, right? And so on and so forth. So it's important to abandon bad company. Having cast aside any desire for the pleasures of cyclic existence, you will not waste your freedom, and so when you die, you will depart with a joyful mind. We see this in people, right? People who really live their lives in accord with Dharma, who make good use of their freedom, and then when they die free of fear, they die joyfully, happily, and they even stay in Tukdam, in a state of meditative equipoise at the point of death. Those who spend their lives doing negative things, who spend their lives in negative states of mind, doing negative actions, you should see how they die. I've seen a lot of people die. And people who've lived negative lives, they die in a horrific way, with fear and anguish, their faces contorted, their mouths agape. On the other hand, those who've lived their lives in accord with the Dharma, they die so peacefully. There's this air of peace and joy around them. They die without anxiety, and their bodies remain pliant and flexible after they die. That's also a wonderful sign of accomplishment. So usually the body becomes stiff very shortly after death, right? With these practitioners, their bodies remain flexible for a long time. So that's an excellent sign, just as is staying in Tukdam. I think Rinpoche said in the Nyingma tradition, staying in Tukdam at the point of death is regarded as really important, but the body just staying soft and flexible is also an excellent sign. As a result of having freed yourself of the demon of avarice and of having accumulated generosity, the provisions for the journey, then wherever you're reborn, you'll never be poor. So the volunteers who are waiting at the doors holding their pots of tea, wouldn't it be easier if you put the pots of tea on the floor? I'm worried your hands are going to end up hurting. But sorry, I'm going to keep going for a little bit, finish this folio before we start the break. Being without attachment to wealth, you'll be content. You will realize that nothing has any essence, and you'll cut through the entanglements of attachment. But recognize that everything is impermanent. You will not be distressed by conflicts. As a result of your seeing that nothing is really necessary, no mundane things are really necessary, the wall of the 8 ordinary concerns, or the worldly concerns, will collapse. When we talk about abandoning the 8 worldly concerns, we only really abandon them, uproot them, at the first bodhisattva bhumi. Nevertheless, from now on, even as when we're still an ordinary being, we need to work on reducing the 8 worldly concerns, to subduing them, to repressing them, to reducing them, bit by bit. And then when we reach the path of seeing and attain the first bodhisattva bhumi, then the 8 worldly concerns will be uprooted, cast aside once and for all, and all personal. So the 8 worldly concerns which stem from personal interest, they will be completely uprooted. And compassion for others will naturally, effortlessly arise. But until we reach that point, the path of seeing, the first bodhisattva bhumi, it's difficult. Still, we should apply ourselves so that all of our Dharma practice, even if it be a simple money recitation or what have you, it should function to erode these worldly concerns, to reduce them bit by bit. The 8 worldly concerns are basically samsaric phenomena. All samsaric things are motivated by the 8 worldly concerns, right? This wish for praise, for fame, for gain, for happiness, and fear of the opposite. By practicing the Dharma correctly, you'll be drawn along the path to liberation and will swiftly accomplish Buddhahood. So reflect thoroughly on the virtues of the precious human body, which is so hard to find and which, when found, is so beneficial. Understand that all appearances and perceptions limited. This life is short-lived and without essence. If you become wealthy or materially comfortable, if you become respected and famous, how does that help you? How does that help you? It's of no use, of no benefit. And when you die, all of that falls away. You cannot take it with you. These things are futile and transient, just like good and bad dreams in a single period of sleep. They do not last. You have to give them up. Then in order to accomplish your long-term wishes, you must now speedily put your efforts into making full use of the freedoms and advantages. If you fail to make the effort, even though you appear to have a human form, you will in fact be no different from an animal with what is called a mere human body. You'll be like a corpse even though you're not dead, insane even though you're not possessed by spirits, lifeless even though still breathing. So if you fail to apply yourself to the Dharma, you fail to practice the Dharma and make use of this human form, you'll be no different than an animal. You might be alive, but you'll just be like a corpse. Here is the advice of the Great Master. Here's the advice the Great Master gave Yasilaji. Births in higher realms are generally very scarce, but in comparison, a precious human birth is much more rare. Even if you've gained a human body, it's nigh impossible to obtain the Dharma. Son of my speech, do not forsake the freedoms and advantages and return empty-handed. So you might become a president or a prime minister. You might become one of the richest people in the world. But there is no value to that. There is nothing meaningful in that. Look at Los Angeles, the famous American city Los Angeles. It's now engulfed in fire, being burnt to the ground. Millions and millions worth of property is being burnt to the ground. It just shows there is nothing lasting or substantial about this kind of material wealth. So if you have money but you don't make use of it, meaningful use of it by offering up to the 3 jewels and helping those in need, then nothing meaningful or worthwhile can come from money. Difficult to find repeatedly like the Udambara flowers, so beneficial when found like the wishing gem. Now that for once all the perfect conditions are ready, use all your efforts to go beyond existence. Now we dedicate the merit and stop for a break. Break until 10 o'clock.
Yerme tege tegle roje Om